It's March 22nd, the second day of spring 2020. We're holed up here at home for the coronavirus, and this is the first online lecture that's on where I'm going to draw instead of just do slides. So I wanted to talk about the supply and demand for the monetary base in the Great Depression, particularly the first bit of the Great Depression, say 1929 to 1933. So just as you've seen before, let me draw the basic situation with the supply and demand for the monetary base. So on that axis is the monetary base itself. On this axis, I have the Treasury bill rate. Okay, and what does the demand for the monetary base look like? Actually, think about that answer before I draw it. It's going to be appearing on screen too soon, but do think about what it would be. Here we go. So back then, the interest on reserves was 0. So you had the demand for the monetary base going down like this, and then the flat part of the demand for the monetary base, which had to do with the 0 interest on reserves, would go over at 0. Now, back then, in 1929, the Treasury bill rate was about 4%. And so that means that if I say put 4% here, then that means the supply of the monetary base to begin with would have to have looked like that. There's the supply of the monetary base. Remember, supply of the monetary base is just the amount of reserves plus the amount of paper currency, and the Fed had complete control over this supply of the monetary base. Okay, then we had bank failures and fears of bank failures. What would that do? Well, now people want to take paper currency out of the banks, so the demand for paper currency goes up, and banks think they need to have some excess reserves so that they have the funds to give people paper currency. Remember that if banks had paper currency in their bank vault, that also counted as reserves. So what that did then was to shift the demand for the monetary base to the right. Okay, so we had to begin with this orange demand for the monetary base. Now we're going to go from orange to green, and the demand shifts out because for any interest rate, people now want more paper currency. They want some excess reserves. The required reserves were the same, so the new demand for the monetary base looks like this. Demand for the monetary base prime, which is green. Okay, now if the Fed had done nothing to the supply of the monetary base, the interest rate would have gone up. That by itself would have been obviously contractionary, but that's not what happened. The Fed did increase the supply of the monetary base, and in fact the interest rate on Treasury bills stayed about the same. So here's the supply of the monetary base primed in purple, keeping the interest rate on Treasury bills about the same. That's what they did in about the first year after the financial panic. After that, the Fed gradually, we know that the interest rate went down, so what the Fed was doing was to increase the supply of the monetary base quite a bit further so that it hit this part of the demand for the monetary base in green where the interest rate is close to 0. Okay, now, so this is the simple story of the supply and demand for the monetary base, but it leaves a big mystery. Why was this so contractionary? If even in the initial period, the interest rate didn't go up, and then later on they're reducing the interest rate, why did things go so badly? Well, two really big things would be going on, and then there's a third that could also be fairly big. First thing is, notice this here is the Treasury bill rate. What the interest rates that firms had to pay if they wanted to borrow to invest, or if you wanted to build a house or something, would have had a risk premium on top of them. And so whatever the Treasury bill rate was, if the risk premium got bigger, then the interest rate that companies would have to pay would have gone up. The second thing is business conditions got to be bad. I mean, the panic itself could have made people a little scared to invest, and that in turn made business conditions bad. And when business conditions are bad, you need a lower interest rate to get people to invest than if business conditions are good. So leaving the interest rate the same is a bad idea if business conditions have worsened. You effectively are leaving aggregate demand lower if you leave the interest rate the same. When things get bad, you got to cut the interest rate, not just leave it the same. Notice aggregate demand is not a function of just the interest rate. The interest rate, very powerful in affecting aggregate demand, but there are many, many other things that affect aggregate demand. It's just that if you do enough with the interest rate, you can get to where you need to go, but you often can't get to where you need to go by leaving the interest rate the same. The third thing is the bank failures themselves could have caused some trouble. If you need a loan from a particular bank because that's your local bank, and banks in the next town over won't really talk to you because they don't know you, but your local bank failed, now you've got trouble getting a loan. So so there's that force too. Notice that effect of banks failing on people being able to, the bank knowing who you are is really kind of an aggregate supply thing. That's not really about aggregate demand. That's about whether you can, I guess it's related to aggregate demand too, because if you can't get the loan, you can't invest, you can't add to aggregate demand that way. But even if aggregate demand is where it should be, that would mean people might inefficiently not do some project. So anyway, that's the analysis of the Great Depression using the supply and demand of the monetary base. And I'm struck by how different this is from the traditional story that emphasizes the decline in the money supply. Notice we don't have to talk about the money supply very much at all, and there wasn't a decline in the monetary base. So this is actually a very different perspective and an interesting one. Thanks for listening. More to come.